And this is what plastic is doing. It's driving certain species, the populations down, and it's putting that ecosystem out of balance, which is a terrible, terrible thing.
Hello, my name is Sacha, but I'm better known as the human swan. I'm also the UN's ambassador for the Convention on Migratory Species. And this year, the charity I founded, Conservation Without Borders, is launching a new expedition to follow the flight of the osprey, an epic migration of 10,000 kilometres through 14 countries from Europe to West Africa. As a part of this, we're doing a series of podcasts to highlight the global stories and connections this bird makes, to help us see our complex and challenged world through the eyes of this incredible animal. In this episode, we hear from Luis Stagneto about the moment he chose to move from London back home to Gibraltar, from work as a high-powered banker to working on troubled tankers. And he describes from a diver's eye view exactly what damage plastics and wet wipes do in the ocean around Gibraltar and how that's affecting everything from the osprey to the whales, and more importantly, what he's doing about it.
So you've got an interest in marine conservation in the area?
I'm a marine biologist, so
my
initial training, I was a computer scientist. I used to work in the City of London and JP Morgan, and I decided that city life and the banks wasn't for me. I'd grown up in Gibraltar by the sea, and I started volunteering at the London Aquarium. I really enjoyed working at the London Aquarium, being next to water and in water. You know, whenever they needed tanks cleaning, I was the first one in there. You know, never had any problems with getting in a wetsuit or whatever. And it just really, it was a huge contrast for me, because on the one hand, I had the banking life, which was great financially, but I hated it. And then on the other side, it was the stuff that I was doing for free, which I couldn't wait to get there and jump in the tanks. And it really drilled home how I was completely in the wrong career, how at a tender age of 18, I had made a decision to go to university and I hadn't really made the right one. So I went back to university and I did marine biology and absolutely loved the 4 years that I did. I absolutely loved it at Southampton. And then I came back to Gibraltar, was looking for work. They were setting up a university here. I was hoping to get involved with the university, but for various reasons, that didn't work out. And my wife turned around and said, well, it doesn't matter, you know enough stuff. We'll set something up and we'll start going to schools and educating kids and doing that sort of thing. We'll do it ourselves. And that's exactly what happened. We set up the Nautilus project. The idea was to get children involved and understand about our ecosystem and the things that affected our ecosystem. Our first major campaign was in plastic pollution, and we're still working on things to do with plastic pollution, but we were able to get government to change laws locally here on single-use plastic items by banning them and levying a 200% tax on them and things like that. So, we had some early wins. And the project has grown from strength to strength, really doing more and more work with the community and internationally. So that's a little bit about the project and about us.
Wow. Okay. There's a few things. One of them I was going to say that I was originally a marine biologist. We have a shared kind of route into what I'm doing now through aquariums. I also used to volunteer to clean an aquarium in Sydney, in Manly.
Okay.
But I did it for breath hold purposes. So it was a way of practicing breath hold, because I used to compete at freediving. Okay. So I would be in there cleaning the shark tank, or upside down in the smaller tanks. I could just be upside down with my feet on the ceiling, like gently scrubbing. Some of that glass doesn't like scratchy materials that much. That's so right. I would spend a few hours early in the morning doing that. How many people have spent time hanging out in those tanks? You also mentioned that one element of the work that you're doing in the region is on plastics.
Yes.
We can get a good picture of the kinds of things you do, but do you have an idea of can you describe, I guess, what the plastic problem looks like in that region? And then potentially what the sources of that plastic are, because you are in quite an unusual position, having waters coming from different regions.
So the second part of the question first, where the sources are is very, very hard to ascertain. We know certain sources for sure, but exactly which contribution comes from where is very, very difficult because of all the mixing of the waters that we have. And so we need to understand properly the amount of microplastic in the Atlantic, the amount of microplastic in the Mediterranean, and possibly the type of microplastic, to then look at our microplastic and see the mixing of that microplastic. So we know the waters mix, so there's likely to be that mixing. Locally, though, we have a lack of a sewage treatment plant in Gibraltar, and unfortunately, many people still put wet wipes down the toilet, and so they get flushed straight out into the sea. For those of you that might not be aware, wet wipes are nylon plastic strands, like made into mats, and obviously they take a very long time to biodegrade. Can you hear the drilling? Yeah. So we have these mats that are formed, and of course they get entangled in all the algae, so it causes a huge problem.
Mats of wet wipes go flushed out to sea, and they form mats that get tangled up in
the algae itself, and so you end up getting a horrible effect on the ecosystem, one that we are trying to work on. But what we're doing in order to work out the microplastics, we do with a lot of the students that work with us and volunteer with us. We do microplastic surveys on the beach. He's involved with our student volunteers in assessing microplastic in Gibraltar. And the way we do this is we go onto the beaches with sieves, scientific grade sieves, and we actually sieve the sand in order to work out the proportion and the size breakdown of all the bits of microplastic in the sand. We've also got a banter net, which is a special type of net which you trawl in the water, surface waters, in order to collect the microplastic floating in the water. And we've also got access to the beach at the end of the runway in Gibraltar. There is a beach which people are not allowed to go on. And we have been working with the RAF locally here in order to get access to that beach, to ascertain the amount of microplastic on that beach. And the idea there is that we want to compare beaches where people are present, beaches where people are not, and then compare that to the amount of microplastic that is floating around in the water to get some idea as to the flows of microplastic.
And you're particularly interested in, obviously the issue of wet wipes is absolutely horrendous. But are you particularly interested now in the microplastics rather than any kind of visible macroplastics? And when you're talking micro, we really are talking like grain of sand.
Exactly. Tiny. Yeah. So I'll tell you how I became interested in the microplastic to begin with. My PhD is actually in phytoplankton, and I'm trying to understand phytoplankton community structures just around the Gibraltar waters, and understand what the drivers for those phytoplankton communities are. So is it, changes in water? Is it mixing? Is it chemical, nutrient availability for growth? Is it biological? Is it disease, bacterial predation? What exactly are driving those community changes? And because I collect water samples, and I've got to filter those water samples down, what I was finding in my slides, pretty much every single slide, were microplastics fibers everywhere. And that started getting me interested in asking those questions. To answer your question, I'm primarily interested in phytoplankton because it's the base of the community, and it has an important component to understanding climate change and the ability to draw carbon into surface waters. But we run a lot of microplastic work here because we feel Gibraltar small enough where we can make important changes that can then be modelled and exported to other countries. And this is what we're really trying to do with the work that we're doing here.
And can you describe for us obviously we're looking at all the birds on migration, but using the osprey as a kind of key example, and it's a fish eater. Can you describe the different ways that you think from an osprey's point of view, the microplastics might be an issue?
So a lot of these birds the fact that they rely on seafood, the more plastic that's floating around, the more plastic scientifically we've seen that birds are consuming just because they encounter it. A lot of these birds are attracted by brightly coloured objects that are floating around. Albatross is the other one that I can think of. And the evidence shows that they are actively selecting these bright bits of plastic and obviously filling their stomach with it. It's not just the ingestion of it. Remember that these birds, if they were to jump at some fish in a shoal that happens to be netting, they can actually get trapped in that netting as well. So it's actually, a physical barrier that can cause distress to these birds. Or if they get the Coke can holders that can be trapped around their neck, as that animal grows, that becomes a noose that forever becomes tighter and tighter and will cut into the flesh of the animal. These are all things that are causing negative effects on the population of these birds, right? And so numbers are obviously declining as a result of it. But that bird will have an effect in terms of the ecosystem as well, because it'll be eating less if there are less birds. The prey species starts to increase because there's less predation, and that is actually a bad thing. People start to always think that, oh, well, there's lots of this one species, that happens to be good. Actually, in most cases, what that indicates is an ecosystem that's out of balance. And this is what plastic is doing. It's driving certain species, the population's down, and it's putting that ecosystem out of balance, which is a terrible, terrible thing.
And is there a route to the osprey via the fish? Are fish in the region potentially consuming plastics as well?
So the local one that is particularly important for us are the loggerhead turtles, because, well, we've got three species that really do it. We've got the sunfish, we've got the loggerhead turtle, and we've got the tunas, and they are important consumers of jellyfish, but they often mistake plastic for jellyfish, and they eat them. And in the case of turtles, the research that we've been reading shows that in about 1 in 3 encounters with a turtle eating plastic, that turtle will actually die, which reduces the population significantly. And this is important because in the summertime, we're seeing increases in jellyfish blooms in the area, and those blooms are affecting people who want to go in and swim and can't, because for days there are swathes of jellyfish everywhere. So yeah, and obviously jellyfish is bad for the fish in terms of food supply. A lot of smaller fish end up getting consumed by these jellyfish blooms, and which means less food availability for the ospreys and other bird species which rely on that food source. So yeah, you can see how plastic actually works its way, in a multifactorial way, in order to really push an ecosystem out of balance.
Plastic's also an issue, but yeah, confusing to try and figure out where all the sources are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm inspired to hear that somebody who has gone from kind of working in the city to devoting life and time and marriage potentially,
yes,
tackling some of these big issues. And I love the fact that you've looked at it and decided actually Gibraltar is on a scale that you can really have an impact on. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you very much for having me.